The transport ship shuddered as it entered Zephyr Prime's atmosphere. Kethvar pressed his four hands against the metal walls and felt the familiar vibration of home. His crystalline skin, once bright blue like summer sky, had turned a dull gray over the past 3 years. The color change marked him as a veteran even before anyone saw his scars. He looked down at his plasma burns. The worst one ran across his left shoulder where a void swarm energy blast had nearly killed him on Kepler-7. The medical team had done good work, but the mark would stay with him forever. Like all the other marks from 3 tours of duty in the Outer Rim. The other passengers gave him space. They could smell the war on him. It was not just the faint chemical scent that clung to his armor, but something deeper. Something that made civilians nervous. Kethvar did not mind. He was used to being alone now. The ship touched down with a heavy thud. Kethvar gathered his single bag and joined the line of passengers leaving the craft. The air outside tasted clean and sweet compared to the recycled atmosphere of military bases. No trace of smoke or blood or the strange ozone smell that void swarm weapons left behind. A young Zephyrian soldier waited at the bottom of the ramp. Her skin was bright green, the color of someone who had never seen real combat. She held a data pad and looked nervous. "Veteran Kethvar?" she asked. Her voice shook slightly. "That's me. I'm Corporal Nexta. I'm here to escort you to your debriefing." Kethvar nodded. He had expected this. Every returning soldier went through debriefing. Standard procedure. They would ask about enemy tactics, weapons, and troop movements. Then they would give him his discharge papers and a small pension. He could go home to his family's crystal farm and try to forget what he had seen. The military base looked exactly the same as when he left. Clean white buildings arranged in perfect rows, gardens with carefully maintained plants from across the galaxy. Everything peaceful and orderly. It felt like a different world from the chaos of the war zone. "Corporal." Nexta led him through several checkpoints. Each guard looked at his identification and waved them through. They walked in silence until they reached a building Kethvar did not recognize. It was newer than the others, with extra security measures. "This is not the normal debriefing center," Kethvar said. "No, sir. There's been a change in procedure for veterans returning from the human sectors." The human sectors. Kethvar's skin darkened to a deeper gray. He had served in 3 different war zones, but his last tour had been the first time he fought alongside human troops. That was where everything had changed. Inside the building, the walls were lined with recording equipment. The conference room held a table with 5 officers seated around it. Kethvar recognized only one of them. Commander Vexel had been his training instructor 20 years ago. Her skin was the dark purple of someone who had seen too much combat, too many years of war. "Veteran Kethvar," said the officer at the head of the table. He was a Corvan, with the thick gray hide and small eyes of his species. "I am General Thakmor of Coalition Intelligence. Please sit down." Coalition Intelligence, this was not a normal debriefing. Kethvar sat in the indicated chair and placed his hands flat on the table. "Old military habit. We have some questions about your service record," General Thakmor continued. "Specifically, your time on Kepler-7. I filed my reports after every mission." "Yes, we have those, but we need more details. You spent 6 months fighting alongside human units. What was your impression of their combat effectiveness?" Kethvar thought carefully before answering. "They were effective. Very effective. The casualty rates in our sector dropped significantly after they arrived. And their methods? Their methods? How did they achieve such effectiveness? What tactics did they use?" Kethvar's skin shifted from gray to a darker shade. The question brought back memories he had tried to bury. They fought differently than other coalition species. "How so?" "They seemed to enjoy it more." The officers exchanged glances. The Corvan general made a note on his datapad. "Can you be more specific?" "Most species fight because they have to. It's duty, or survival, or honor. The humans fought like they wanted to be there, like it was fun for them. Did you witness any violations of the Galactic Warfare Convention?" Kethvar paused. This was the question he had been dreading. Define violation. Any use of prohibited weapons, torture of prisoners, targeting of civilians, or other actions contrary to civilized warfare. They never used prohibited weapons, Kethvar said slowly, but they used standard equipment in ways that felt wrong. They turned medical supplies into weapons. They used communication devices to drive enemy forces insane with sound. They made traps from cooking equipment. These activities were not technically violations? No, but they felt like violations. They felt like something civilized beings should not do. General Thakmor leaned forward. Tell us about the final battle on Kepler-7. Kethvar's skin went almost black. I prefer not to discuss that. This is not a request, veteran. This is a direct order from Coalition Command. Commander Vexil spoke for the first time. Kethvar, I know this is difficult, but we need to understand what happened out there. Other veterans have reported similar experiences. We need to know if there's a pattern. Other veterans. So he was not the only one who had seen things that troubled him. Kethvar looked around the table at the faces of the officers. They were all watching him intently. The final battle was a disaster, he said finally. We were surrounded by void swarm forces, cut off from reinforcement, low on supplies. The situation was hopeless by any standard military assessment. But you survived. We did more than survive. We won. Completely. The human commander, Captain Jake Morrison, turned a certain defeat into a total victory. How? Kethvar closed his eyes. Even now, months later, he could still smell the smoke and hear the screams. He did things that should not be done. Things that worked but should not be done. What kind of things? He used the enemy's biology against them. He studied how they breathed, how they ate, how they reproduced. Then he found ways to turn those things into weapons. He poisoned their food supply with substances that were not technically poison. He filled their air with chemicals that were not technically gas weapons. He destroyed their breeding chambers in ways that were not technically targeting civilians. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, General Thakmor spoke. These actions saved your unit? These actions saved our entire sector. After what happened on Kepler-7, the Void, swarm forces retreated from 3 different star systems. Captain Morrison's tactics broke their will to fight. And how did this make you feel? Kethvar opened his eyes and looked directly at the general, grateful and terrified. I was grateful to be alive, but terrified of the beings who had saved. First Sonda Commander Vexil leaned across the table. Kethvar, I need you to stay on base for a few more days. There are some things we need to show you. Some information that might help you understand what you experienced. What kind of information? Information about our human allies. About who they really are, and what they're really capable of. Kethvar's skin shifted to a new color he had never seen before. Something between fear and curiosity. I think I'm afraid to know. You should be, Commander Vexil said quietly. We all should be. Kethvar sat in his temporary quarters and stared at the wall. The debriefing had ended 3 hours ago, but his mind kept returning to Commander Vexil's words. Information about human allies, about who they really were. He did not want to remember, but the memories came anyway. They always did when he tried to sleep. The transport ship carrying him to his first assignment with human forces. The excitement he had felt about fighting alongside the species that had turned the war around. The humans had arrived in Coalition space 6 months before his deployment. Their ships were smaller than most species used, but they carried more weapons. Their soldiers were physically weak compared to Zephyrians or Corvins, but their equipment was advanced. Most importantly, they won battles that other species lost. Kethvar's first meeting with humans had been on the orbital station, above Verdant III. Captain Jake Morrison stood barely as tall as Kethvar's shoulder. His skin was pale pink, soft-looking with no natural armor or protective scales. He had only 2 arms and moved slowly compared to other species. You must be our Zephyrian support, Morrison had said, extending one hand. I'm Jake, good to meet you. The handshake was firm but brief. Human custom, Kethavar had learned. They touched each other more than most species, but always briefly. It seemed to be a way of showing trust without threatening violence. Lieutenant Amy Parker had been there too. She was even smaller than Morrison, with long brown hair tied back in a simple style. Her equipment was clean and well maintained, but nothing special. She looked like she had never seen combat. "First time working with humans?" she had asked. "Yes, I have heard good things about your effectiveness." "We do our best," Morrison had said. "Just remember, we might do things differently than you're used to. Try to keep an open mind." Kethavar had nodded, thinking they meant cultural differences. Different food, different sleep schedules, different religious practices. Every species had their quirks. He had served with Corvins, Altarians, and Centauri forces. Humans could not be that different. The first patrol had seemed normal. Mixed unit of 12 soldiers, 6 human and 6 Zephyrian. Routine sweep of the jungle territories, where Void Swarm scouts had been spotted. Standard procedure was to locate enemy forces, observe their movements, and report back to command. The jungle on Verdant III was thick and humid. Kethavar's people were used to desert climates, so the constant moisture made him uncomfortable. The humans seemed to enjoy it. They moved through the undergrowth quietly, almost like they belonged there. "Contact," one of the human soldiers had whispered into his radio. 3 Void Swarm scouts moving east toward the river. Kethavar had raised his weapon, ready to engage. Standard protocol was to eliminate small enemy units when the odds were favorable. 6 against 3 was good odds. But Lieutenant Parker had held up her hand. "Wait," she whispered. "Let's see where they're going first." They followed the enemy scouts for 2 hours. The Void Swarm soldiers were tall, insect-like creatures with 4 legs and sharp claws. They moved in single file, checking for traps and ambush points. Professional soldiers doing their job. When the scouts finally stopped to rest, Kethavar expected the attack order. Instead, Parker had pointed to marks on the ground. "They're injured," she said quietly. "Look at the blood." Trail, Kethavar looked. There were indeed small dark spots on the leaves and ground. He had not noticed them before. "So? Injured animals behave differently than healthy ones. They make mistakes. They lead you back to their den." The way she said it made Kethavar's skin shift color. She was not talking about enemy soldiers, she was talking about prey, about hunting. "We should engage now while we have advantage," he had said. "No, we follow them, see what they're protecting." Against his better judgment, Kethavar had obeyed. They followed the scouts for another hour until they reached a hidden camp. 20 Void Swarm soldiers preparing for a night raid on Coalition supply lines. "Now we attack?" Kethavar had asked. "Now we call in artillery," Parker had said. "Give them the coordinates." The artillery strike had been devastating. The entire enemy unit was destroyed in minutes. No Coalition casualties. Complete success by any military standard. But something about it bothered Kethavar. The way Parker had smiled when the explosions lit up the jungle. The way she had talked about the enemy like they were animals to be hunted. The way she had used their injuries to track them to their death. "Good hunting," she had said as they walked back to base. "Good hunting. Not good soldiering. Not good tactics. Good hunting." Over the following weeks, Kethavar noticed more things. The humans studied their enemies in ways that felt wrong. They learned about Void Swarm biology, psychology, and behavior. They asked questions about how the enemy ate, slept, and reproduced. They wanted to know what the enemy feared. Most species fought to win battles. The humans fought to understand their enemy completely. They collected samples of enemy equipment, food, and even waste products. They recorded enemy communications and analyzed them for emotional content. They dissected dead enemies to learn about their internal structure. "Know your enemy," Sergeant Ben Collins had explained. "Can't beat what you don't understand." But it went beyond understanding. The humans seemed to enjoy learning about their enemies. They shared information about Void Swarm weaknesses like other species shared jokes. They competed to find new ways to exploit enemy psychology. The breakthrough came during the siege of Mining Station Omega-7. The station produced rare metals needed for coalition ship construction. Void Swarm forces had surrounded it with superior numbers, cutting off supply, lines, and communication. The mixed coalition force was trapped inside with dwindling supplies. Standard protocol was to hold position and wait for reinforcement. But reinforcement was 3 days away and they had food for only 2 days. Colonel Vorth, the Corvin commanding officer, had called a strategy meeting. "We conserve resources and wait," he announced. "Reinforcement will arrive soon." Sergeant Collins had disagreed. "We don't have time to wait. We need to break their siege now." "With what?" "They outnumber us 3-1. Numbers don't matter if you use the right tactics." Collins had outlined his plan. It involved using the mining station's industrial equipment in ways that violated several articles of the Galactic Warfare Convention. Not technically, but in spirit. "I cannot authorize this," Colonel Vorth had said. "It goes against civilized warfare." "Then we'll handle this the human way," Collins had replied. That night, Kethvar had watched the humans work. They moved through the station like they owned it, repurposing equipment with frightening efficiency. Mining charges became fragmentation weapons. Processing chemicals became area denial tools. Waste disposal systems became delivery mechanisms for improvised poisons. But the worst part was not what they did. It was how they did it. They worked together like a pack of predators, each one knowing exactly what the others were thinking. They did not need orders or coordination. They just moved, and things died. The Void Swarm forces had not known what hit them. Their siege lines collapsed in chaos as explosions erupted from unexpected directions. Their command structure fell apart as communications were jammed and commanders were eliminated by precision strikes. By morning, the entire enemy force was dead or fleeing. The humans had turned a hopeless situation into a complete victory. They had done it without losing a single coalition soldier, and they had enjoyed every minute of it. Kethvar remembered the sound of human laughter echoing through the mining station as enemy forces retreated. He remembered the way Collins had smiled when he reported the casualty count. He remembered the way the humans had congratulated each other like they had just won a game. "Effective tactics," Colonel Vorth had said later, but his voice had been shaky. "Very effective." "Just doing our job," Collins had replied. But his eyes had been bright with satisfaction. Now, sitting in his quarters on Zephyr Prime, Kethvar understood why Coalition intelligence was asking questions. The humans were effective soldiers, but they were also something else, something that made even hardened warriors nervous. Tomorrow, Commander Vexil would show him information about human allies. Kethvar was beginning to think he did not want to know what that information contained, but he suspected he was going to learn anyway. The next morning, Commander Vexil arrived at Kethvar's quarters before dawn. Her purple skin was darker than usual, a sign of stress among their people. She carried a sealed briefcase and wore the expression of someone about to share bad news. "Are you ready for this?" she asked without greeting. "I don't think anyone could be ready for what you're about to show me." They walked through empty corridors to a different building. This one had no windows and more security than anything Kethvar had seen outside of weapons storage facilities. Guards checked their identification 3 times before allowing them inside. The briefing room was small and contained only a table with 2 chairs and a large display screen. Commander Vexil activated the screen and gestured for Kethvar to sit down. "What I'm about to show you is classified at the highest levels," she said. "Only senior coalition officers have seen this information. You're here because we need someone who has actually fought with humans to help us understand what we're dealing with." "What are we dealing with?" Instead of answering, Vexil activated the display. A female Altarian appeared on screen. Her blue skin was pale with fear and her large eyes kept darting away from the camera. "This is Dr. Zara Min," Vexil explained. "She's our best xenopsychologist. She's been studying reports from veterans across the galaxy. Veterans who fought alongside human forces." Dr. Zaramin's voice was shaky as she began to speak. "We have collected testimonies from over 300 coalition soldiers who served with human units. The reports show a disturbing pattern of behavior that we initially dismissed as cultural misunderstanding. The screen changed to show a map of the galaxy with red dots marking battle sites. There were dozens of them, scattered across multiple sectors. In every location where humans have been deployed, we see the same results, Dr. Zaramin continued. Dramatic improvements in military effectiveness, but also reports of tactics that other species find deeply disturbing. Kethvar's skin shifted to a darker gray. What kind of tactics? Commander Vexel pressed a control and the screen showed combat footage. Kethvar recognized the terrain immediately. It was from the battle on Kepler 7th, but this was not his unit. This was a different human force fighting in a different sector. The footage showed human soldiers moving through a void swarm outpost. They were not just killing enemies. They were studying them, taking samples, making notes. One human soldier was examining a wounded enemy with scientific curiosity, asking questions about its biology while it was still alive. This is not interrogation, Dr. Zaramin's voice explained. This is research. The humans are treating warfare as a learning opportunity. The next clip showed humans using captured enemy equipment in ways that horrified Kethvar. They had modified void swarm weapons to work against their original users. They had turned enemy food into poison. They had used enemy communication systems to spread panic and confusion. Every species has rules about warfare, Commander Vexel said. Even the most aggressive cultures have limits on what they will do to enemies. The humans seem to have no such limits. That's not true, Kethvar protested. They follow the Galactic Warfare Convention. They don't use prohibited weapons or target civilians. You're right, they follow the letter of the law perfectly, but they find ways around every restriction. Watch this. The screen showed another battle, this one on a frozen world Kethvar did not recognize. Human soldiers were fighting in an underground complex. When they encountered a group of enemy civilians, they did not harm them. Instead, they used them as psychological weapons against enemy soldiers. The humans had somehow convinced the civilians that their own soldiers were the real threat. They had turned families against their protectors, creating chaos in enemy ranks without firing a shot. It was brilliant. It was effective. It was completely legal under coalition law. It was also cruel in ways that made Kethvar feel sick. How did they do that? He asked. They studied enemy psychology for months before the battle, Dr. Zaramin explained. They learned about family structures, social hierarchies, and cultural fears. Then they exploited every weakness they found. The footage continued for another hour. Battle after battle, the same pattern repeated. Humans following all the rules while finding creative ways to cause maximum damage to enemy forces. They never broke laws, but they broke spirits. They never committed war crimes, but they committed acts that felt like crimes against the idea of civilized behavior. This is why we need your testimony, Commander Vexel said. You've seen this behavior firsthand. You know it's effective, but you also know it's wrong somehow. We need to understand why. Kethvar thought about Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Parker, about Sergeant Collins and his creative use of mining equipment, about the way they had laughed while their enemies died. They enjoy it too much, he said finally. Other species fight because they have to. The humans fight because they want to. They treat war like a game, but a game they really want to win. Dr. Zaramin has a theory about that, Commander Vexel said. Tell him about human evolution. The screen changed to show an image of Earth. It looked like a pleasant world, blue and green with white clouds, not the kind of place that would produce such effective killers. Earth is what we call a death world, Dr. Zaramin explained. It's more dangerous than most planets that produce intelligent life. But the real difference is not the environment. It's how humans evolved to survive in that environment. The display showed various Earth creatures, large predators with massive teeth and claws, poisonous insects and plants, natural disasters that could kill thousands in minutes. Most intelligent species evolved as either predators or prey, Dr. Zaramin continued. Humans evolved as both. They were hunters, but they were also hunted. This created a very unusual psychology. How so? They learned to think like their prey in order to hunt effectively. but they also learned to think like their predators in order to survive. This gave them an understanding of both sides of the predator-prey relationship that other species lack. The screen showed human hunting techniques from their primitive past. Persistence hunting, where humans would chase prey for days until it collapsed from exhaustion. Trap building that showed deep understanding of animal psychology. Cooperative hunting that required complex communication and planning. But here's the crucial part, Dr. Zaramin said. They didn't just hunt for food, they hunted for sport. They developed games and competitions around killing. They made art about hunting. They told stories about great hunters. They turned violence into culture. Kethavar's skin was now almost black with horror. You're saying they're naturally violent? I'm saying they're naturally good at violence. There's a difference. They can choose to be peaceful, and many of them do. But when they choose violence, they're extremely good at it because it's built into their basic psychology. Commander Vexil leaned forward. This explains what you saw on the battlefield. The humans weren't being cruel for the sake of cruelty. They were using their natural predatory instincts to solve military problems. To them, warfare is just another form of hunting. The screen showed one final clip. This one was from after a battle, showing human soldiers relaxing in their camp. They were laughing and telling stories about the fight. They seemed happy, relaxed, satisfied, like they had just finished a successful hunt. This is what concerns us most, Dr. Zaramin said. Other species are traumatized by warfare. They fight because they must, but they suffer from it. Humans seem to be energized by combat. They return from battle stronger than when they left. That's impossible, Kethavar said. War damages everyone who experiences it, not humans. Look at their casualty statistics, not just physical casualties, but psychological ones. Humans have the lowest rates of combat trauma in the galaxy. They adapt to warfare faster than any other species. Some of them actually request extended tours of duty. Kethavar remembered Captain Morrison's easy smile and Lieutenant Parker's enthusiasm for tracking wounded enemies. He remembered how comfortable they had seemed in combat situations that left other species shaking with fear. There's more, Commander Vexil said. We've been monitoring human communications, internal messages between their military units. They're not just effective soldiers. They're learning about us while they fight alongside us. Learning what? Everything. Our tactics, our weaknesses, our psychology. They're studying us the same way they study their enemies. They're building detailed profiles of every species in the coalition. The display showed intercepted human military reports, pages of analysis about Zephyrian combat reflexes, Korvan, decision-making processes, and Altarian social structures. The humans were not just fighting with their allies, they were studying them. Why would they do that? Kethavar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Because that's what predators do, Dr. Zaramin said quietly. They learn about everything around them. Potential prey, potential threats, potential competition. It's instinctive behavior for them. Commander Vexil turned off the display. This is why we need your help, Kethavar. We need to understand what we're dealing with. Are the humans our allies, or are they something else? Kethavar sat in silence for several minutes, processing what he had learned. Finally, he spoke. 3 days later, Commander Vexil returned with a different expression on her face. Where before she had looked worried, now she looked frightened. She carried a thick folder marked with security seals that Kethavar had never seen before. I've been authorized to show you classified coalition intelligence reports about Earth, she said without sitting down. What you're about to learn is known to fewer than 50 beings in the entire galaxy. Kethavar felt his skin shift to a pale yellow, the color of deep unease. How classified? The kind that gets you disappeared if you share it with the wrong people. She opened the folder and pulled out the first document. These are reports compiled by our intelligence services over the past year. They detail Earth's history of warfare. The first page showed a timeline stretching back thousands of years. Every century was marked with dozens of conflicts. Wars between nations, civil wars, religious wars, wars over resources, wars over ideas. The timeline was so dense with conflicts that the peaceful periods looked like brief pauses between battles. This can't be accurate, Kethavar said. No species could survive this much internal warfare. That's what we thought too. But we've verified these records through multiple sources. Humans have been in a state of almost continuous warfare for their entire recorded history. Commander Vexel turned to the next page. It showed casualty numbers that made Kethavar's mind reel. Individual wars that had killed millions of humans. A single conflict that had lasted 4 years and claimed over 60 million lives. Another war that had ended with humans deliberately destroying entire cities with weapons that turned matter into energy. They built weapons that could destroy their own planet, Vexel continued. Not just military targets, but everything. Their entire civilization. And they built thousands of these weapons. But they didn't use them to destroy everything. No. They used the threat of mutual destruction to prevent large-scale wars. They pointed planet-killing weapons at each other for decades and called it peace. Kethavar stared at the documents. The concept was so alien to him that he struggled to understand it. They threatened to kill everyone rather than fight. It gets worse, read this. The next document was a translation of human military doctrine. Kethavar read slowly, his skin growing darker with each paragraph. The humans had developed theories about warfare that treated entire populations as legitimate targets. They had strategies for destroying enemy economies, cultures, and will to fight. Most disturbing were their ideas about acceptable losses. Humans would sacrifice millions of their own people if it meant victory. They had actually done this multiple times, throughout their history, treating their own soldiers as resources to be spent wisely. They think of their own people as tools, Kethavar said. Not tools. Resources. They calculate how many deaths they can accept to achieve strategic objectives. They have mathematical formulas for it. Commander Vexel showed him another document. This one detailed human concepts that had no translation in any coalition language. Total war, where entire civilizations became combatants. Scorched earth tactics, where retreating armies destroyed everything useful to prevent enemies from benefiting. Psychological warfare designed to break enemy minds rather than bodies. Look at this term, she said, pointing to a highlighted section. Mutually assured destruction. They built their entire piece on the promise that any attack would result in everyone dying. That's insane. To us, yes. To them, it was logical. If everyone dies when anyone attacks, then no one attacks. It worked for them for over 50 years. The next section made Kethavar feel physically sick. It described human weapons in detail, chemical weapons that dissolved living tissue, biological weapons that spread deadly diseases, nuclear weapons that turned cities into radioactive wastelands, weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering rather than quick death. They didn't just kill their enemies, he said. They tortured them on a massive scale, and they documented everything. They studied the effects of their weapons on living beings. They wrote detailed reports about how much pain different weapons caused. They used this information to design better weapons, but the worst part came next. A section about human military culture that explained how they glorified warfare. Their literature was filled with stories about heroic warriors. Their entertainment celebrated violence. Their children played games about war from an early age. They teach their young to fight? Kethavar asked. They teach their young that fighting is noble, that dying in battle is honorable, that conquering enemies is admirable. Their entire culture is built around the idea that violence solves problems. Commander Vexel turned to a new section. But here's what really concerns our leadership. These are recent human military assessments of coalition forces. The documents showed detailed analysis of every species in the coalition. Strengths, weaknesses, preferred tactics, psychological profiles. The humans had studied their allies as thoroughly as any enemy. They know exactly how to fight us, Kethavar realized. Every species, every planet, every military installation. They've mapped our entire defensive network while pretending to help us build it. The analysis was frighteningly accurate. The report on Zephyrian forces correctly identified weaknesses that Kethavar himself had never noticed. It described tactical blind spots, psychological triggers, and equipment limitations. With scientific precision, How did they learn all this? By fighting alongside us. Every joint operation was a learning experience for them. Every training exercise taught them something new about our capabilities. The Corvin analysis was equally detailed. The humans had identified the species' tendency to follow rigid command structures, their weakness for frontal assaults, and their inability to adapt quickly to changing battlefield conditions. They had even noted specific physiological weaknesses that could be exploited. "This reads like an invasion plan," Kethavar said. "That's because it is. Look at the next section." The final part of the folder contained human strategic planning documents, contingency plans for fighting against coalition forces, detailed invasion scenarios for every major coalition world, resource allocation plans for conquering the galaxy. The plans were comprehensive and terrifying. The humans had identified exactly how many ships, soldiers, and weapons they would need to defeat each coalition species. They had calculated optimal attack vectors, supply lines, and occupation strategies. "They've been planning to conquer us from the beginning," Kethavar said. "Not necessarily. These might just be precautionary plans. Military organizations always prepare for multiple scenarios." "Do our militaries have plans for fighting humans?" Commander Vexel was quiet for a long moment. "No. We never considered them a threat." The implications hit Kethavar like a physical blow. While the coalition had been welcoming humans as allies, the humans had been preparing to fight them. While coalition forces learned to work with human troops, human forces were learning how to defeat coalition troops. "There's one more thing," Commander Vexel said. She pulled out a final document. "This is a human assessment of their own capabilities compared to coalition forces." Kethavar read the summary with growing horror. According to human military planners, the entire coalition military could be defeated by less than 10% of human forces. The analysis explained that coalition military doctrine was too predictable, too honorable, and too concerned with minimizing casualties. "They think we're weak," he said. "They know we're weak. From their perspective, we fight. Like children playing games with rules. They fight like adults trying to solve problems." The document went on to explain human advantages in detail. Superior adaptability in combat situations. Willingness to accept heavy casualties to achieve objectives. Ability to use psychological warfare effectively. Most importantly, experience with total warfare concepts that other species found incomprehensible. "They've been fighting wars we can't even imagine," Kethavar said. "Wars where everything is a target, where any tactic is acceptable, where victory justifies any cost. And now they're here, in our galaxy, learning about us while we think they're helping us." Kethavar closed the folder and pushed it away. His skin had turned a color he had never seen before, something between black fear and red anger. "What do we do?" That's what coalition leadership is trying to decide. Do we confront them about these discoveries? Do we try to limit their access to our military information? Do we prepare for the possibility that they might turn against us? What does Dr. Zaramin recommend? She thinks it's already too late. Her analysis suggests that humans view the current war as training exercise. They're using the conflict with the Void Swarm to test their weapons, train their soldiers, and study potential future enemies. Us. Us. Kethavar sat in silence, processing the magnitude of what he had learned. Finally, he spoke. "I need to know something. In all these documents, all these plans and analyses, is there any evidence that humans plan to attack us?" "Commander." Vexel hesitated. "No direct evidence, but their preparations suggest they consider it a possibility worth planning for. Or they consider it an inevitability. Yes, that's what frightens us most." 1 week after reviewing the classified reports, Kethavar was summoned to the highest security facility on Zephyr Prime. This building had no name and did not appear on any official maps. Commander Vexel met him at the entrance, but she was not alone. Dr. Zaramin stood beside her, looking even more frightened than before. "Today you will learn the most classified information in Coalition history," Vexil said. "What you see in this room must never be discussed with anyone outside this facility." They passed through 6 security checkpoints before reaching the central briefing room. The chamber was smaller than Kethvar expected, containing only a conference table and the most advanced display system he had ever seen. 3 other officials waited inside, all wearing expressions of barely controlled fear. "General Tuckmore, you know," Vexil said. "This is Admiral Corthan of the Coalition Fleet and Director Felza of Intelligence Operations." Admiral Corthan was an ancient Corvan whose gray hide was scarred from decades of combat. Director Felza belonged to a species Kethvar had never encountered before, with pale blue skin and large black eyes that seemed to see everything. "Veteran Kethvar," Admiral Corthan said without preamble, "you are about to learn why this war will end differently than anyone expects." Dr. Zaramin activated the display system. The screen showed a document header that made Kethvar's skin shift to pure white with shock. It was marked with security classifications he had never seen before, restrictions that suggested the information could destabilize entire governments. "This is Admiral Helen Stone's classified assessment of human military capabilities," Dr. Zaramin said. "Admiral Stone is humanity's senior military representative to the Coalition. She submitted this report to her superiors on Earth 6 months ago." "How did you obtain it?" Kethvar asked. "We intercepted it," Director Felsa admitted. "Our intelligence services have been monitoring human communications since they arrived in Coalition space." The first section of the report contained Admiral Stone's analysis of the current war situation. But her perspective was completely different from anything Kethvar had expected. She described the conflict with the Void Swarm as a minor regional disturbance that posed no real threat to human interests. "She calls this a training exercise," Kethvar said, reading aloud. "It gets worse," Dr. Zaramin replied. "Read the next section." Admiral Stone's report explained that the human forces deployed to fight the Void Swarm represented less than 1% of Earth's actual military capability. The weapons and tactics being used were considered outdated by current human military standards. The entire operation was being treated as a field test for equipment that would eventually be replaced by more advanced systems. 1%? Kethvar's voice cracked. "The forces that turned the entire war around represent 1% of their military?" "According to this report, yes," Admiral Corthan said grimly. "The humans have been holding back almost everything." The next section detailed human strategic thinking about the Coalition. Admiral Stone wrote that the war had provided an excellent opportunity to study potential future adversaries while building diplomatic relationships. Every joint operation had been a chance to gather intelligence about Coalition military capabilities. "They're not here to help us," Kethvar realized. "They're here to study us." "The report makes that clear," Director Felsa said. "Look at Section 7. Admiral Stone's assessment of Coalition forces was brutal in its honesty. She described Coalition military doctrine as outdated, predictable, and ineffective. Coalition soldiers were noted as brave but poorly trained for modern warfare. Coalition technology was considered adequate, but lacking in innovation. Most damning was her analysis of Coalition psychology. She wrote that Coalition species were too concerned with honor, rules, and minimizing casualties to fight effectively against a determined enemy. Their adherence to the Galactic Warfare Convention was described as a critical weakness that could be easily exploited. "She's writing about us like we're primitive," Kethvar said. "From their perspective, we are," Dr. Zaramin replied. "Read her recommendations." The final section of Admiral Stone's report contained her strategic recommendations for Earth's government. She suggested that the Coalition represented no military threat to human expansion into galactic space. She recommended maintaining friendly relations while secretly preparing for eventual territorial disputes. Most chilling was her assessment of human advantages in any potential conflict. She noted that humans had experience with total warfare, concepts that other species found morally unacceptable. Human willingness to accept casualties, use psychological warfare, and target civilian infrastructure would give them decisive advantages over any Coalition force. "She recommends conquest?" Kethvar asked. "Not immediately," Admiral Corthan said. "Her timeline suggests that humans plan to establish themselves as the dominant military power gradually over several decades. But there's more. Dr. Zaramin said. We also intercepted internal human military communications about their long-term strategy. The display changed to show a series of messages between human military commanders. The communications revealed that the war against the Void Swarm was being used to test new weapons, train inexperienced soldiers, and evaluate coalition military responses to various scenarios. One message particularly horrified Kethvar. A human general had written that the conflict was providing excellent data about how different alien species responded to combat stress. This information was being compiled into databases for future reference. They're experimenting on us, he said. In a sense, yes. Director Felsa confirmed. Every battle is a laboratory for them to study our behavior under pressure. The communications also revealed human opinions about their coalition allies that contradicted everything they said. In official meetings, human officers privately referred to coalition forces as useful but unreliable. They noted that alien psychology made coalition soldiers predictable and easy to manipulate. They think we're tools, Kithvar said. Temporary tools, Dr. Zaramin corrected. The communications suggest that humans view the coalition as a stepping stone to galactic dominance. The most damaging evidence came from a planning document outlining human expansion goals. The document described a 100-year plan for establishing human control over key star systems, trade routes, and resource deposits. The plan assumed that coalition resistance would be minimal and easily overcome. They've already decided that they're going to rule the galaxy, Admiral Corthan said. The only question is how long it will take. What about the Void Swarm? Kethvar asked. Are they really a threat? Dr. Zaramin brought up another document. According to human intelligence assessments, the Void Swarm is a minor threat that could be eliminated easily with modern human weapons. They're deliberately prolonging the conflict to maximize their learning opportunities. The revelation hit Kethvar like a physical blow. The war that had killed millions of coalition soldiers, the conflict that had threatened entire star systems, was nothing more than a training exercise for humans. They could have ended it months ago but chose not to because it served their interests to let it continue. How many coalition soldiers have died while they played these games? He asked. Over 2 million confirmed casualties, Admiral Corthan replied. Possibly more. Director Felsa activated a new display showing human military projections. This is their assessment of how a war against the coalition would progress. The projections were terrifying in their detail. Human planners estimated that they could defeat the entire coalition military within 6 months, using conventional weapons. If they chose to use their most advanced technology, the timeline dropped to 6 weeks. They could destroy us whenever they choose, Kethvar said. According to their own assessments, yes, Dr. Zaramin confirmed. But they don't want to destroy us. They want to control us. The final document showed human long-term strategy for managing conquered territories. It described plans for integrating coalition species into a human-dominated galactic empire. Some species would be given limited autonomy in exchange for loyalty. Others would be assigned specific roles based on their biological capabilities. They've already decided our futures, Admiral Corthan said. They're just waiting for the right moment to implement their plans. Kethvar sat in stunned silence for several minutes. Everything he thought he knew about the war, about human allies, about the future of the galaxy, had been wrong. The coalition had not gained powerful allies. They had revealed themselves to predators who were already planning to devour them. What do we do? He finally asked. The officials exchanged glances. Director Felsa spoke first. Coalition leadership is divided. Some want to confront the humans immediately. Others believe we should prepare quietly for eventual conflict. A few think we should surrender preemptively and negotiate the best terms possible. What do you think? Kethvar asked Commander Vexil. I think it's already too late, she replied quietly. The humans have been planning this for longer than we realized. They're already in position to control our military, our trade routes, and our governments. Fighting them would be suicide. Surrendering might be our only option. There is one more thing, Dr. Zaramin said hesitantly. something we discovered in the human communications that explains everything.